The following is a concise guide to the modern philosophy paper. The reading for the paper is Descartes' first meditation, and you can read that either in the readings or more conveniently in the paper guide. It contains the entire text of Descartes' first meditation. The thesis of the paper is this. The purpose of this paper is to summarize and critically evaluate Descartes' skeptical arguments. And the issue is, do Descartes' skeptical arguments justify the degree of doubt claimed? Now the paper has got 4 sections. Be sure to label all 4. These are the introduction, the summary, the argument, and the conclusion. And the reason why it's important to label them is because the grading of each section is based on what the section is supposed to do, and that's how I grade it. So be sure to label the sections. Now in terms of turning the paper, in regards to the drafts, those come in to me as a printed copy. You can turn them in during class, you can drop them off during office hours. I also have a drop envelope for the drafts, and they have to be printed so I can mark them up. There's also a separate video going over how to do the drafts, but the gist of it is, for the drafts, be sure to give me a printed copy to me by, or rather before, the deadline for drafts. Now the final version of the paper is uploaded to Blackboard via Safe Assign, so you don't have to print up the final version, rather you upload it to Blackboard. Now in terms of when you get your grade back, you're welcome to discuss your grade. Now to do this, what you do basically is print up a copy of the paper, bring it to me during office hours, and I'll go over it with you. It's important to bring a printed copy of the paper because I just have the papers on Blackboard, and usually I don't have any paper, so be sure to bring a copy to discuss it. Plagiarism, everyone knows what plagiarism is, and it's bad, and you shouldn't do it. Now in regards to the formatting of the paper, pretty straightforward. I don't have an obsession about formatting. Basic ideas use, normal margins, half-inch, fine. Double space is good. In terms of fonts, good standard font, like, Times or something is fine. As far as citing sources, use whatever you use in your major. If you're not sure how to cite sources, be sure to consult us, a guideline for that. Also, the paper guide includes some basics about citing sources. Now, as I mentioned, the paper breaks into 4 parts. The introduction is the first part. It's worth 5 points. It should be 125 words or less. And the way I grade it, basically, is based on, does it have the required 5 points, which includes the following. First, a statement of the thesis. Second, a summary statement, what you do in the summary. Your position statement, which is your position on the issue. Your argument statement, in which you state basically how you're going to argue. And last, some minimal background. Now this is all detailed in the paper guide. If you have questions about what exactly this should look like, just look at the paper guide and it provides examples of each of these. But the main thing is, it should be 125 words or less. Make sure it contains those 5 points. And if you do, you get the 5 out of 5 points. If not, less out of 5. Now, the first big chunk of the paper is the summary. It is Descartes' entire first meditation. Not the entire Meditations on First Philosophy, just the first one. It's worth 45 points and needs to be 350 words or more. The overall paper, since this is Gordon rule, has to be 2,000 words, so be sure to hit that word count. Now the objective of a summary is to summarize the text clearly, concisely, accurately, and most importantly, in your own words. So be sure to do all of those 4 things. Most importantly, the in your own words part. Now, we'll go over the meditation in great detail in class, but here's the basic outline, and there's a more full one in both the notes and the paper guide. Now in the first part, Descartes lays out his goal. And his goal basically is to sweep aside all the uncertainty in order to build a firm foundation for philosophy and the sciences. And his method is to doubt anything that can be doubted, even the least. And his overall sort of method is, he believes if he knocks out the foundations of beliefs, all the beliefs based on those foundations will collapse. And the foundation he's going after is the senses. Now, the second part of meditation 1 involves him going through the doubting of the senses. And he begins his method of doubt by doubting the particulars of the senses. And he brings up examples of various optical illusions, etc., in which the senses deceive us. And he infers that we should not trust our senses once they have deceived us. Then he moves on, after a brief skeptical pause, to the dream problem. He goes into quite a bit of detail here, but the basic idea is he argues that there's no sure way to distinguish between dreaming and being awake. Now he does pause again. He says perhaps there's an analogy here to painting, that what we experience in dreams, although the complex things, may not be real. For example, like a centaur, surely the parts that make it up, like in the case of a centaur, the upper body of a human, the lower body of a horse, are real. Or at the very least, the colors that make up the painting are real. Now he pauses here as well, in terms of math. And so at the end of the dream problem, he doubts pretty much everything, except he believes that things like mathematics, etc., cannot be doubted. As he says, even in a dream, squares have 4 sides, and 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. Now just when it seems he can't doubt anymore, he moves on to the final part of Meditation 1, namely God and the demon. Now in the case of God, he claims that he believes that God created him, but he contends that it could be the case that God allows him to be deceived all the time, that everything he experiences and believes is not true. And his argument for this is that it's clear that God allows him to be deceived some of the time. And if it's not inconsistent with God's goodness to allow him to be deceived some of the time, it is not inconsistent with God's goodness to allow him to be deceived all the time. Now just when things seem to be at their worst, namely that God could allow him to be deceived all the time, he brings in sort of his final skeptical tactic, the evil genius or evil demon. And the idea, as Descartes puts it forth, is that it could just be him and the demon is causing him to have all these experiences that are not real. There is no world, he has no body, etc. And so it's just him and the evil demon. Now Descartes says, even that worst case scenario, he can still withhold judgment. So in the summary, the idea is basically to include the key points in the outline, the detailed one, in the paper guide, laying out his starting goal, his method, his going through doubting of the senses, with the first sense argument, the dream problem, the painter analogy, the skeptical pause involving math, and then the final part involving God and the demon. And again, be sure the summary is clear, concise, accurate, and in your own words. Now, in terms of grading the summary, it basically grades in terms of the following rubric. The objective of the summary is, again, to clearly, concisely, accurately, and in your own words, convey what's going on in the first meditation. And the grade is based on how well it completes those objectives. How complete it is. Do you have all the stuff in there? Is it accurate? Do you get it right? Is it concise? That is to say, is it a summary? And is it in your own words? To the degree the answer is yes, that's good. To the degree the answer is no, that's bad. Now, an excellent summary presents the details exceptionally well. It's clear, concise, accurate. The reader, looking through it, would clearly understand exactly what's going on in the first meditation. Now, a good one is a bit, it's not, obviously not bad, it's good, but it's, not quite excellent. An adequate one simply gets the job done. It's adequate. It's a ham sandwich or salad of a summary in that it gets the basic job done. A poor one is lacking in certain areas. It may be inaccurate a bit, it may be kind of unclear, it may be otherwise defective. And of course, a failing one can range from doing nothing to plagiarism to just being, really awful, or being about something that has nothing to do with the assignment. And so the range is from excellent to failing based on those points of assessment. The clarity, the accuracy, the conciseness, and the in your own words part. Now, the third part of the paper is the argument part. It's worth 45 points. It needs to be 500 words or more. Again, the overall word count has to be 2,000 words because of the Gordon rule thing. You begin by giving your position statement on the issue. And the issue is, do Descartes' skeptical arguments justify the degree of doubt claimed? And since he has three basic arguments, sense argument, dream argument, God/evil demon argument, you basically have three positions. And you can have different positions on each of those three issues. Now the first argument is this, the doubting of the senses. Now all the stuff about the arguments is spelled out in great detail in the paper guide. This is just sort of a quick run through to sort of familiarize with the paper, but to get all the key details, be sure to go through the paper guide. Now the first argument again is doubting the senses. One option is to say yes, Descartes' argument succeeds. That is to say, he establishes that you should doubt your senses. One hint is to look at deceptive senses and notions like optical illusions, etc. To use an argument by example, for example, which we'll talk about in class, which would be used to support his case. Another hint is drawing an analogy in regards to distrust. Descartes says, once the senses have deceived us, you should not trust them. And you could perhaps draw an analogy with a person. If a person deceives you, repeatedly, it would probably be unwise to trust them. By analogy, perhaps one should not trust the senses. Now, if you think the first argument on the senses fails, then the idea is to back it up. One hint is to use the methods of critical thinking. The idea of critical thinking, there are various standards that tell when your senses deceive you and when they don't. And if we can work out a system of discerning deceit from non-deceit, that would undercut his argument. Second hint, the idea of deceit assumes trust, and the ability to detect deceit assumes we can pierce deceit. So you could argue, based on that, to try to show that in order for Descartes to even make his case that his senses deceive him, he'd have to know something, namely that his senses are deceiving, and use that to undercut his argument. But in any case, regardless of your position, best you address the doubting the senses argument. Make your position clear, does it work, does it not, and then back up your position with arguments. Now the second argument is the dream argument. Roughly put, it's one where he argues we have no sure way of discerning between dreaming and being awake. Now, as always, there are two positions. One is you agree he succeeded, the other is you believe that he failed. If you believe Descartes succeeded, you want to argue in his favor. One way to do this is to use an intuition argument, an appeal to intuition, which we'll discuss in class, also included in the paper guide. One way to do this is to make an appeal to movies, like The Matrix, like Inception, and like other similar movies in which one cannot distinguish between what is real and what is not. And build a story and make this appeal to intuition. Another option is to argue that we do have standards by which to tell dreaming from being awake. Present the standard or standards, argue for them. Now, if you think that Descartes fails, that we cannot, distinguish between these, or we can distinguish between these, what you want to do is this. Come up with standards that show that we can make that distinction. So if you agree with him, you want to argue that the standards you come up with can't do this. We have no way of distinguishing between dreaming and being awake. If you believe his argument fails, then you want to argue that we do have such standards. We can distinguish between dreaming and being awake. Now the third argument is the God/evil demon argument. That's where he argues that he, Descartes, could be deceived across the board. Either God allows this to occur, or there's a demon actively deceiving Descartes. Now, if you agree with Descartes that his argument succeeds, one way to argue for this is to use some of the methods in the dream case, because in a way, the demon is sort of a souped-up, dream case. Instead of Descartes being his own demon, so to speak, deceiving himself, with the demon argument, it's like the Matrix. You've got something else generating the illusion. And so you can use similar arguments, in regards to the demon argument. If you want to argue in his favor, another way to do it is to argue on the basis of the failure of memory. And we'll discuss that in class. And there's also another possibility to use the problem of evil. That requires quite a bit of development. Now, if you think that his argument fails, one way to do it is to argue, against the odds of there being such a demon. To argue that Descartes would have to ironically make his skeptical case, He'd have to establish the demon is a possibility, which would seem to show that he has knowledge, which sort of undercut things. Another option, as a hint, is the ironic approach, to say that ironically, Descartes succeeded too well. In this case, the idea would be to show that given his objective, to try to beat skepticism, that his evil demon is too powerful to beat. And sort of ironically, he fails by over-succeeding. That is, his argument establishes a great deal of skepticism, but defeats his overall purpose. And again, with all three of the arguments Descartes makes, be sure to take a position on each of them: sense argument, the dream argument, the God-demon argument, and then back up your position with arguments. Now, in terms of assessing it, the argument section is graded based on the clarity of the presentation, how well it's organized, but primarily on the quality of the argument. That is to say, how well you logically support your position on each issue. Now, an excellent argument section is extremely clear, it's well organized, and the arguments are, excellent. They very effectively support your case. A good argument is good arguments, does a good job, but not quite excellent. An adequate one gets the job done. You get a position on each issue, you get some arguments in there, they're okay, they're not great, they're not bad, they're just adequate. Now, a poor argument section has some flaws. Non-fatal flaws, but some flaws. Weak arguments, maybe, or you may have like one good argument and some weak ones, but overall, the whole section is averaged out weak. A failing argument section can range from not having an argument section at all to having defective, fallacious arguments, or simply leaving parts out. Because again, you have to cover all three of the arguments, so if a paper is written that's very good but only covers one, that's only a third of the credit. So we may have a very good 1/3, unlike a bridge. You don't want 1/3 of a bridge, no matter how awesome it is, it's still not going to get the job done. Likewise in the argument section. If there's only one argument covered, it's only 1/3 done. So that 1/3 can be good, but the whole thing will not be good enough. Now the final part of the paper is, of course, the conclusion. One way to do this very easily is copy your introduction, paste it to the conclusion, and change from the future tense, from I will, to I did. And then replace the minimal background with some final relevant remark. Like the introduction, it's worth 5 points, should be 125 words or less, contains a thesis, summary statement, position statement, argument statement, and in place of the background, a final relevant remark. And again, the conclusion shouldn't be too long because it's only worth 5 points. It should be quite concise. Now, I've also included in the paper guide a checklist, which you don't have to attach to the paper, because especially obviously the Blackboard one, but it'll give you kind of a pre-flight check to see if you get all the stuff in there. Also, when you do a draft, what I'll do, basically to make things easy for me, is if I have a comment to make that is something I commonly do, I have a letter or number code on it, and I'll just, instead of writing stuff out in my crappy handwriting, I'll put down the letter and number code, and then you just look at the comment, codes on the comment sheet in the paper guide, and that will tell you what the comment means. Now, if I have to say something that's not covered in the comment sheet, I will, of course, write it out, but I'll go with the comment codes to save time.